Story 1. The Ice Fisher's Reflection. Marcus Chen had been ice fishing on Lake Winnipeg for 23 winters. At 51 years old, he knew the ice like he knew the lines on his own hands. Every crack, every groan, every safe spot and danger zone. He'd grown up in Gimli, Manitoba, where winter fishing wasn't just a hobby but a way of life. Passed down from his grandfather, who'd emigrated from Taiwan in the 1950s and somehow fallen in love with the brutal Canadian winters. It was January 14th, 2019, and Marcus had driven his pickup onto the ice at 4:30 a.m., parking it near his usual spot about 2 miles from shore. The temperature hovered around -32°C, cold enough that his breath crystallized instantly and fell like tiny diamonds in his headlamp's beam. He'd set up his ice shanty by 5:15 a.m., a well-insulated 8-by-8-foot shelter with a propane heater, comfortable chair, and all his gear organized with the precision of decades of practice. By 6 a.m., he'd drilled his hole and dropped his line. The hole was perfectly circular, about 10 inches across, and the ice was a solid 18 inches thick. More than safe enough for his truck, let alone his shanty. The water below was black as crude oil, and when Marcus shined his flashlight down, the beam seemed to get swallowed after only a few feet. Lake Winnipeg was deep here, almost 60 feet, and the water had a peculiar quality in winter, thick and dark and ancient. The first 3 hours passed normally. Marcus caught 2 decent walleye and a small northern pike, which he threw back. He listened to CBC radio on his battery-powered radio, drank coffee from his thermos, and enjoyed the profound silence that came during commercial breaks. This was what he loved: the solitude, the simplicity, the meditative quality of watching a line disappear into dark water. Around 9:30 a.m., Marcus noticed something odd. When he looked down into his fishing hole, he could see his own reflection on the surface of the black water, illuminated by his overhead LED lantern. This wasn't unusual in itself. He'd seen his reflection countless times, but this morning the reflection seemed unusually clear, almost high definition despite the darkness of the water. He stared at it for a moment, then shrugged and returned his attention to his line. But something nagged at him. He looked back down at the hole. His reflection was smiling. Marcus wasn't smiling. He touched his own face to confirm. No, his expression was neutral, maybe even slightly frowning from concentration. But in the water, his reflection had a distinct smile, subtle but unmistakable. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. He waved his hand over the hole, disturbing the surface. When the water settled, his reflection reappeared, still smiling. Marcus leaned closer, and his reflection leaned closer too, but the smile remained while his own face stayed serious. "The hell?" he muttered, and in the water he saw his reflection's lips move differently, not quite matching his words. Marcus stood up quickly, backing away from the hole. His heart hammered in his chest. In his 23 years of ice fishing, he'd experienced a lot of strange things. Mysterious lights over the ice, weird sounds, even once seeing what he thought might have been a UFO, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so intimately wrong, so personally violating. He decided to pack up. This wasn't worth it, whatever it was. Probably just tired eyes, maybe some weird optical effect from the ice and the LED light. He'd come back another day. But when he looked back at the hole one more time, his reflection was staring directly at him, even though Marcus was standing to the side. The reflection's head had turned to track him, independent of his own position, and it was still smiling, wider now. Marcus grabbed his phone to take a picture, but he had no signal out here. He never did. The photo he snapped showed only the black water and a vague blur, nothing like what he was seeing with his naked eyes. He began breaking down his shanty faster than he'd ever done before, throwing gear into his plastic bins without his usual organization. All the while, he could feel the hole behind him, could sense something watching from it. He didn't want to look, but he couldn't help himself. Every time he glanced back, his reflection was there, and it had begun to move on its own, scratching its face, tilting its head at unnatural angles, that smile growing into something that was no longer human. When Marcus finally looked directly at it, his reflection waved at him. A slow, deliberate wave. Marcus stood frozen, his hand not moving at all. The reflection then pointed downward, into the depths of the water. Marcus heard a sound, a low, resonant humming that seemed to come from the ice itself, vibrating up through his boots. The humming grew louder, and he realized with horror that it was forming words, stretched out and distorted. "Come down!" He ran. Just abandoned everything. His expensive gear, his shanty, even his tackle box that had belonged to his grandfather. He sprinted to his truck, fumbled with frozen fingers to get the key in the ignition, and gunned the engine. The truck's wheels spun on the ice for a terrifying moment before gaining traction. As he drove away, he looked in his rearview mirror. Through the clear plastic window of his shanty, he could see a dark figure standing inside, looking out at him. It had his build, his winter coat, his face. But it was wrong somehow. The proportions weren't quite right, like looking at himself through a funhouse mirror that made everything sinister. Marcus didn't stop until he reached the shore. He sat in his truck at the public landing, shaking for almost an hour. Other fishermen came and went, asking if he was okay. He told them he was fine, just cold, needed to warm up. He never retrieved his gear. Later, he told his wife he'd fallen through thin ice and lost everything, which was why he came home with nothing. She knew he was lying. Marcus never fished on thin ice, but she didn't push it. She could see something had changed in him, something haunted behind his eyes. 3 weeks later, another ice fisherman found Marcus's shanty. It was still set up, still intact, though the heater had long since run out of propane. The fisherman peered inside and saw all of Marcus's gear neatly organized. Too neatly, he'd later report to the authorities. Everything was arranged in perfect rows, with an almost obsessive precision that suggested someone had spent hours organizing it. The fishing hole inside the shanty was still open despite the weeks of -30 temperatures that should have frozen it solid. When the fisherman shined his light down into it, he swore he saw someone down there deep in the water looking up at him. He said it looked exactly like Marcus Chen. Marcus never returned to Lake Winnipeg. He sold his truck, his ice fishing gear, everything connected to that part of his life. He moved his family to Calgary 6 months later, telling everyone he'd gotten a job opportunity. But really, he just needed to be away from the ice. Away from the lakes, away from any body of water where he might see his reflection and find it looking back at him with that knowing smile. Sometimes on particularly cold nights, Marcus dreams of his reflection climbing out of that hole, wet and grinning, walking across the ice with his face wearing his life like a coat. In the dreams, it comes to his front door and knocks, and when his wife answers, she doesn't notice anything wrong. She lets it in, welcomes it home. Marcus always wakes up before he can see what happens next. But he checks the locks every night, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And he's removed every mirror from his house because twice now, just twice, but that's twice too many, he's caught his reflection moving just a fraction of a second out of sync with his own movements. He tells himself it's just paranoia. Just trauma from whatever happened out there on the ice. But deep down, in a place he doesn't like to acknowledge, Marcus knows the truth. Something came back with him that day. Something that wears his face in the spaces between reflection and reality. Something that's still waiting for the right moment to step fully into his world. And sometimes, when it's very quiet, he can still hear that distorted humming voice. Come down. Story 2. The Researcher's Cairn. Dr. Sarah Voss had been studying Arctic fox populations in Nunavut for 7 years. At 34, she was considered one of the leading experts on Arctic adaptation and wildlife behavior in extreme cold environments. She'd spent more than 800 nights camping in sub-zero temperatures, had weathered storms that would send most people running for civilization, and had once gone 3 weeks without seeing another human being. The isolation didn't bother her. In fact, she preferred it. Her current research station was located approximately 60 miles northeast of Cambridge Bay, a tiny temporary camp consisting of her heavy-duty expedition tent, scientific equipment, and enough supplies for 2 months. It was February 2021, and she was tracking a specific fox family group that had exhibited unusual denning behavior. The temperature was holding steady around -42 Celsius, with wind chills that could drop it to -55. Perfect weather for her purposes. The foxes were most active in these conditions. Sarah had been at this particular site for 11 days when she first noticed the cairn. It appeared about 400 yards northeast of her camp, sitting on a small rise in the otherwise flat tundra. Cairns weren't unusual in the Arctic. Inuit travelers had been building them for thousands of years as landmarks and navigational aids. But Sarah was certain this one hadn't been there the day before. She'd hiked that exact area while tracking a fox, and she would have noticed a cairn this size, roughly 4 feet tall, made of carefully stacked stones. She approached it with scientific curiosity. The stones were frost-covered but not particularly weathered, suggesting recent construction. They were stacked with precision, each one balanced perfectly on the one below. At the top was a single flat stone different from the others. It looked almost like slate, with a peculiar dark green coloration that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sarah took photographs and GPS coordinates, noting them in her research journal. She assumed another researcher had built it, though she couldn't imagine why they wouldn't have mentioned passing through the area. The nearest other scientific team was at least 80 miles south. That night, as she lay in her sleeping bag reviewing her daily notes, she heard a sound outside her tent. The distinct clicking of stones being moved. She grabbed her flashlight and unzipped her tent, pointing the beam into the darkness. The cairn, 400 yards away, was clearly visible in her light. It looked exactly the same as it had that afternoon. She scanned the area for Arctic foxes or polar bears, but saw nothing. The clicking had stopped, probably just ice contracting in the extreme cold, she decided, though she'd never heard ice make quite that sound before. The next morning, the cairn was closer. Sarah stood outside her tent, coffee cup steaming in her gloved hands, and stared at it. The cairn was now perhaps 300 yards away on a different rise. It looked identical to yesterday. Same height, same careful construction, that same dark green stone on top. She checked her GPS coordinates from the previous day. No, she wasn't confused about its location. It had definitely moved, or someone had built a second cairn. But why? And who? Sarah hiked to the original location. There was no sign a cairn had ever been there. No disturbed stones, no marks in the frost. She then went to the new location and examined this cairn closely. The stones looked identical to the ones from yesterday, including a peculiar chip on one of the middle rocks that she'd noticed and photographed. Her scientific mind struggled to explain it. Had she been more tired than she'd realized yesterday? Had she misremembered the location? She prided herself on her observational skills and attention to detail, but everyone makes mistakes. She took new photographs and GPS coordinates, making detailed notes. That night, she lay awake, listening. Around 2 a.m., she heard it again, the clicking of stones. This time, she was ready. She'd positioned her camera outside her tent with motion sensors. She grabbed her most powerful spotlight and burst outside. The cairn was moving, not being moved, moving on its own. The stones were slowly, deliberately rearranging themselves, floating inches apart and then settling into new positions. As Sarah watched in frozen horror, the entire structure seemed to deconstruct and reconstruct itself, flowing like liquid stone before settling back into its cairn shape. It was now 200 yards away, closer to her tent. Sarah's spotlight captured every moment, but her hands were shaking so badly she knew the footage would be nearly useless. The temperature had dropped further. Her equipment's digital display showed -48°C, and she could feel the cold starting to penetrate her expedition-grade parka. But she couldn't look away from the cairn. The dark green stone on top seemed to be pulsing with a faint bioluminescence, a sickly glow that reminded Sarah of deep-sea creatures she'd seen in documentaries. As she watched, the glow intensified, and she felt something probe at her mind. Not a thought, not a voice, but a presence, an awareness. Something was paying attention to her. She stumbled backward into her tent and zipped it shut with trembling fingers, as if a layer of nylon could protect her from whatever was out there. Her rational mind was screaming at her to document this, to observe and record like the scientist she was. But a deeper, more primal part of her brain was screaming something else. Run. But where would she run to? The nearest settlement was 60 miles away. In these temperatures, in the dark, she'd be dead within hours. Her radio had limited range, and there was no one close enough to reach anyway. Her satellite phone could call for extraction, but the earliest a plane could arrive would be tomorrow afternoon, weather permitting. She was alone with whatever the cairn was. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat with her back against her equipment cases, staring at the tent wall, listening. The clicking sounds continued throughout the night, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. Once she heard what sounded like footsteps crunching through the frozen snow, circling her tent. But when she built up the courage to look outside with her flashlight, there was nothing, just the cairn, now perhaps 100 yards away. By morning, she'd made her decision. She called for emergency extraction, citing equipment failure. The pilot who picked her up that afternoon asked why she was leaving so much gear behind. Sarah told him she'd come back for it, knowing she never would. From the helicopter, she looked down at her campsite. The cairn was now standing directly next to her tent, and scattered around it in a perfect circle were 13 other cairns, each one identical in size and shape. They hadn't been there the day before. She was certain of that. The pilot saw them too. "Huh," he said. "Inuit memorial site? Weird spot for one, though." Sarah didn't answer. She was counting the cairns again because she could have sworn there were now 14 instead of 13. And as the helicopter banked and turned south, she saw the dark green stone on top of the central cairn catch the weak winter sunlight. For just a moment, it looked less like stone and more like an eye. The footage from her motion sensor camera was corrupted, showing only static. Her photographs displayed normally until the images from the last 2 days, which appeared as blank white frames. Her detailed notes remained, but when she tried to type them up for her research database, her hands would start shaking so badly she had to stop. Sarah never returned to that research site. She submitted her final fox population report 6 months later, taking a position at a university in Toronto where she could do her Arctic research through data analysis and satellite imagery. She told colleagues she'd burned out on fieldwork, needed to be closer to civilization. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. She'd started seeing cairns everywhere. Not real ones. She knew they weren't real. But in her peripheral vision, in the corners of rooms, even once in the reflection of her office window, she'd catch glimpses of carefully stacked stones with that dark green capstone. And twice now she'd woken in the middle of the night to the sound of clicking stones, even though she lived on the 12th floor of a modern apartment building, hundreds of miles from the nearest rock that wasn't part of a building's foundation. She tried to convince herself it was PTSD, a psychological response to an unexplained experience. But Sarah was a scientist, trained to observe and document, and she'd observed something impossible. She documented something that shouldn't exist. The cairns were real, they moved, they watched, and somehow, impossibly, one of them had followed her home. Story 3. The Stranded Driver's Companion. Tyler Morrison had been driving medical supplies between Whitehorse and Dawson City for 6 years. The 533-kilometer route along the Klondike Highway was treacherous in winter, especially the long stretches where you could drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. But Tyler was careful, experienced, and his Freightliner was equipped with every cold weather modification available. Block heater, auxiliary fuel system, reinforced battery array, even a small bunk-mounted diesel heater for emergencies. On March 3, 2022, he left Whitehorse at 2:40 p.m. with a full load of medical supplies destined for Dawson City Hospital. The weather forecast showed clear skies and temperatures around -28°C, cold but manageable. He'd made this run hundreds of times in worse conditions. Everything went smoothly for the first 3 hours. Tyler passed through Carmack's around 4:30 p.m., stopped briefly for coffee and a fuel check, then continued north as the sun began its early winter descent. By 6:00 p.m., he was well past Pelly Crossing, driving through the darkest section of the route where civilization disappeared and wilderness took over. The truck died at 6:47 p.m. Tyler remembered the exact time because he'd just glanced at his dashboard clock, thinking about whether to stop at Stewart Crossing or push through to Dawson. One moment the engine was purring smoothly, the next it coughed twice and went silent. All his lights died simultaneously. Headlights, dashboard, even his phone charger indicator. Complete electrical failure. In 22 years of driving trucks, Tyler had never experienced anything like it. He coasted to the shoulder and sat in the sudden silence, his breath already starting to fog in the rapidly cooling cab. The temperature outside was -31 and dropping. Without the engine, his cab would reach ambient temperature within an hour. He tried the ignition, nothing. Checked the batteries with his voltmeter. They showed full charge but delivered no power. It was as if the entire electrical system had simply stopped existing. Tyler grabbed his satellite phone and his emergency pack, then climbed out of the cab. He'd stay with the truck. That was rule number 1 in Arctic breakdown protocol, and call for rescue. His company had contracts with several tow services that could reach him within 2 to 3 hours. But when he tried his satellite phone, it was dead. The screen wouldn't even light up, though he'd charged it that morning and it had been working fine at his last stop. He tried his cell phone. Same thing, completely dead, wouldn't turn on. A curl of real fear started in his stomach. He climbed back into the cab and tried his CB radio. Static. He adjusted frequencies, checked connections, even banged on the radio casing. Nothing but empty static. Not even the usual distant chatter from other truckers. He would have to walk. Stewart Crossing was about 40 kilometers back, but there was a lodge closer, maybe 20 kilometers. He could make that in 4 or 5 hours if he pushed hard. It wasn't ideal, but Tyler had good cold weather gear and a headlamp. People had walked farther in worse conditions. He was gathering his supplies when he saw the light. It appeared on the highway behind him, a single headlight coming from the south. Relief flooded through him. Another vehicle meant rescue, warmth, a working radio. He grabbed his emergency flares and started walking back along the road, waving his arms. The light didn't seem to be getting closer. Tyler walked faster, waving his flares. The light maintained its distance, maybe 500 yards away, steady and unmoving. After a minute, Tyler stopped. The light stopped too. When he walked backward toward his truck, the light advanced, maintaining the same distance. When he stopped, it stopped. Tyler's relief evaporated, replaced by confused unease. He stared at the light, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It looked like a motorcycle headlight, but who the hell would be riding a motorcycle on the Klondike Highway in March at -31 degrees? He shouted, "Hello, I need help." His voice vanished into the vast silence of the Yukon night, swallowed by endless miles of frozen wilderness. The light blinked off, then on again. Then it split into 2 lights, then 3, then 5. They arranged themselves in a horizontal line across the highway, all maintaining that same fixed distance. Tyler backed toward his truck, unable to look away from the lights. They hung there in the darkness like eyes watching him. His scientific mind tried to provide explanations. Other vehicles, some kind of optical illusion, northern lights reflecting off ice. But none of it made sense. These lights were deliberate, intelligent, reactive to his movements. He climbed back into his cab and locked the doors, which he immediately recognized as absurd. Locks wouldn't stop whatever those lights were, but it made him feel marginally safer, an illusion of security in an increasingly insane situation. The lights moved closer, gliding along the highway without any sound of engines or tires. Tyler could see them more clearly now through his windshield. They weren't attached to anything. They were just lights, floating 3 feet above the pavement in a perfect horizontal line. They stopped 20 feet from his truck. Tyler sat frozen, his hand gripping his useless satellite phone so hard his knuckles ached. The lights hovered there, steady and patient. After several minutes, the center light detached from the line and floated closer to his truck, stopping just outside his driver's side window. In the light's glow, Tyler could see his own reflection in the window glass, except his reflection was smiling at him with an expression he'd never worn. An expression of such profound joy and terror mixed together that it looked inhuman. The light brightened, and Tyler heard a sound, a voice, distorted and stretched like an audio file played at quarter speed. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from inside his own head as much as from outside the truck. "Cooled," the voice said. "So cooled." Tyler squeezed his eyes shut. This wasn't happening. He was experiencing hypothermia-induced hallucinations, or carbon monoxide poisoning, or something rational that his mind could process. When he opened his eyes, everything would be normal. But when he opened his eyes, the light was inside his cab. It hovered between him and the passenger seat, pulsing gently. It cast no shadows, created no heat. Tyler pressed himself back against his door, as far from it as he could get. The light drifted closer and he saw things moving inside it, shapes that might have been faces or hands or something else entirely. The faces all looked wrong, twisted like people who'd been frozen mid-scream and then partially thawed. "Join us," the voice said, clearer now. "So lonely. So cold, join us in the cold." Tyler's hand found the door handle. He yanked it, tumbled out of the cab and ran blindly into the forest beside the highway, crashing through brush and snow, branches tearing at his face. Behind him, he could see the lights spreading out, searching. They moved between the trees like living things, patient predators tracking their prey. He ran until his lungs burned, until he couldn't feel his feet anymore, until he stumbled and fell face first into a snowbank. He lay there gasping, waiting for the lights to find him. They didn't come. Tyler lifted his head and looked back. Through the trees, he could see the highway and his truck. The lights were gone. His truck's headlights were on, illuminating the empty road. He staggered back to the highway, every survival instinct screaming that this was a trap. But he was freezing, disoriented, and alone. He had no choice. His truck's engine started on the first try. The dashboard lit up, all systems normal. His satellite phone was working again, showing full charge and perfect signal. His CB radio crackled with normal trucker chatter. Tyler drove to Dawson City without stopping, white-knuckling the steering wheel the entire way. He delivered his load, filed a brief report about a temporary electrical problem, and drove back to Whitehorse the next day. He never mentioned the lights, never told anyone what he'd seen or heard. Who would believe him? But Tyler requested reassignment after that, taking a route between Vancouver and Calgary. He told his dispatcher he was tired of the cold, wanted something easier. The truth was that he couldn't shake the memory of those lights, the distorted voice, the faces frozen in the light. And he couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened if he'd stayed in that cab, if he'd let the light touch him. Would he have joined whatever those things were, trapped in the frozen darkness of the Klondike Highway, searching for warmth and companionship in the endless winter night? 6 months later, Tyler heard about another trucker who disappeared on that same stretch of road. They found his truck abandoned, engine running, lights on. The cab was empty, but there were strange marks on the inside of the windshield. Handprints, dozens of them, all pressed against the glass from the inside, as if someone had been desperately trying to get out, or as if many someones had been trying to get in. Tyler quit long-haul trucking entirely after that. He took a warehouse job in Burnaby, working day shifts, going home every evening to his apartment where he kept every light burning until dawn. He told himself he was being paranoid, that he'd overreacted to a weird experience that had a rational explanation he just hadn't figured out yet. But on particularly cold nights when the temperature drops below -20, Tyler sometimes sees lights outside his window. Lights that hover and watch and wait. Lights that pulse with the memory of faces frozen in eternal cold. He doesn't look at them directly anymore, doesn't acknowledge them. Because somewhere deep in his lizard brain, Tyler knows a terrible truth. The lights are patient. They've waited in the frozen wilderness for decades, maybe centuries. They can wait a little longer. And eventually, when he's old or sick or just unlucky, when his defenses are down and the cold gets in, they'll come for him. They'll take him back to that stretch of highway where the wilderness is absolute and the darkness is complete, where it's always cold. Story 4. The Disappeared Town. Rebecca Zhang's GPS showed that the town of Frost Hollow, Alaska, should be exactly 3.7 miles ahead. She'd been driving for 11 hours straight from Fairbanks, chasing a story about a remote settlement that had supposedly been abandoned overnight in 1987. Rebecca was an investigative journalist for Northern Territory magazine, and she specialized in debunking urban legends and uncovering the truth behind supernatural stories. Frost Hollow had all the marks of a classic ghost town tale: mysterious abandonment, no official records, only vague stories passed down through locals. It was December 18, 2020, and the temperature was -37 Celsius. Her rental SUV was handling the primitive road adequately, though road was a generous term for what was essentially 2 tire tracks through frozen wilderness. Rebecca had excellent cold weather gear and enough supplies for 3 days. She planned to spend one night in Frost Hollow, photograph the abandoned buildings, interview any squatters or locals she might find, and drive back with a solid debunking article. The GPS showed she'd arrived, but there was nothing there. Just forest and snow and the weak afternoon sun hanging low on the horizon. Rebecca stopped the SUV and checked her coordinates against the historical record she'd obtained from the Alaska State Archives. This was definitely the right location. Latitude 65.284 N, longitude 147.8392 W. She got out and walked around looking for any signs of previous habitation. After 20 minutes of searching, she found them. Foundation stones partially buried in snow, barely visible. Old rusted equipment half consumed by trees. A metal sign so weathered the text was illegible. This was Frost Hollow, or what was left of it. Rebecca started taking photographs and notes. The town had been here, had been real. From the archives, she knew it had once had a population of about 200 people, mostly miners and their families. Then, according to the stories, everyone had vanished in a single night. Houses left with food on tables, vehicles abandoned mid-street. The supernatural crowd loved to speculate. Aliens, government conspiracy, mass hysteria. Rebecca was determined to find the mundane truth. She was photographing one of the foundation stones when she noticed something odd. The light had changed, not gradually the way it should as afternoon faded to evening, but suddenly. One moment it was 3 p.m. with weak winter sunlight. The next it was deep twilight, as if someone had dimmed the sun like a light switch. Rebecca checked her watch. It still showed 3:14 p.m. She looked at her phone, 3:14 p.m., but the sky said it was at least 6 or 7 p.m. She could see stars. "What the hell?" she muttered, turning in a slow circle. The forest around her looked different too. The trees were positioned wrong, angles shifted. And there, about 50 yards away, where there had been nothing but snow-covered foundations, stood a building. It was a small house, wood construction, with light glowing in the windows. Smoke rose from a chimney. Rebecca's journalist instincts warred with growing unease. This couldn't be happening. Buildings didn't materialize out of nowhere. But there it was, solid and real, warmth radiating from its windows into the frozen air. She walked toward it slowly, her camera ready. As she got closer, she could see more buildings appearing from the twilight. A whole street of houses, a general store, what looked like a small church. Frost Hollow wasn't abandoned. It was occupied and alive. Rebecca heard voices, a child laughed. Somewhere a dog barked. The sounds were muffled as if coming through thick glass, but they were unmistakably sounds of normal life. She could smell wood smoke and something cooking. Stew, maybe, or roasted meat. She reached the first house and peered through the window. Inside, she could see a family sitting around a dinner table. Mother, father, 2 children. They were eating, talking, completely normal. Except they looked wrong somehow. Their movements were too smooth, too fluid, and their faces, when she caught glimpses of them, seemed to be blurred, like photographs taken with a slow shutter speed. Rebecca knocked on the door. The sounds inside stopped immediately. Total silence. After a moment, footsteps approached the door from inside. The knob turned. The man who opened the door looked like he'd stepped out of the 1980s. Corduroy pants, a flannel shirt, a mustache that had gone out of style decades ago. His face had that same blurred quality, features that refused to stay in focus no matter how hard Rebecca tried to look at them. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice sounded normal enough, pleasant even, but there was something off about it. A slight echo, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Rebecca said, her journalist training kicking in automatically. "I'm doing research on Frost Hollow. I understood the town was abandoned?" The man smiled, though the expression looked more like a memory of a smile than the real thing. "Abandoned? No, we're all still here. We've always been here. Where else would we go?" "Right," Rebecca said slowly. "And how many people live in Frost Hollow currently?" "About 200, the man said. "Same as always. Would you like to come in? My wife made pot roast, there's plenty." Every survival instinct Rebecca possessed was screaming at her to run. But her curiosity was stronger. She needed to understand what was happening here. "Thank you, but I really should be getting back to my vehicle. Maybe I could talk to your mayor or someone in charge. I'd like to write an article about your town." "Article?" The man's smile widened impossibly, stretching beyond what human facial muscles should allow. "We don't get many visitors. Most people can't find us, but you found us. That means you're supposed to be here." Rebecca stepped backward. "Actually, I think there's been a mistake. I should go." "No mistake," the man said. And now other people were appearing on the street, dozens of them, all with those blurred faces and too smooth movements. "You found Frost Hollow. That means Frost Hollow found you. We've been waiting for new people. We've been alone so long." Rebecca ran. She sprinted back the way she'd come, crashing through snow, her breath tearing at her lungs in the extreme cold. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, not running, just walking, but somehow keeping pace with her panic. The voices called out to her, overlapping and echoing. "Stay with us. We're so lonely. You can't leave Frost Hollow. No one leaves Frost Hollow." She burst through a line of trees and stopped, disoriented. She was on a street, not the forest, a street. Houses lined both sides, all with lights in their windows, all with those blurred families visible inside. She'd somehow run deeper into the town instead of away from it. Rebecca spun around, trying to orient herself. Every direction looked the same. Houses, streets, that impossible twilight. Her SUV was gone, or she'd lost track of which direction it had been. The town surrounded her, sprawling and infinite, far larger than a settlement of 200 people should be. She picked a direction at random and kept running. The streets twisted and turned, never quite making sense. Intersections appeared where there shouldn't be intersections. She'd passed the same church 3 times from different directions. The general store kept appearing on her left no matter which way she turned. Eventually, exhausted and frozen, Rebecca stopped running. She bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for air. When she looked up, she was standing in front of a house that looked exactly like all the others. But through the window, she could see herself inside, or someone who looked like her. This other Rebecca was sitting at a dinner table with a blurred family eating pot roast, smiling with that same wrong smile all the other residents wore. The Rebecca inside turned and looked directly at her. Their eyes met. The inside Rebecca mouthed something. "You're home now," Rebecca screamed. She screamed until her voice gave out, until her throat was raw, until the cold air felt like broken glass in her lungs. And then something shifted. The twilight lightened. The houses began to fade, growing transparent like ghosts. The sounds of the town, voices, footsteps, that barking dog, grew distant and then silent. Within seconds, Rebecca was standing alone in an empty forest, surrounded by snow-covered foundations and rusted metal. She checked her watch. 3:17 p.m. Only 3 minutes had passed. Her SUV was exactly where she'd left it, 50 yards away. Rebecca walked to it like a zombie, got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. She drove all night, stopping only for gas, not feeling safe until she reached Fairbanks and the lights of civilization. She tried to write the article. She tried multiple times, but every time she sat down to type, her hands would start shaking and she'd see those blurred faces, that version of herself sitting at the dinner table in someone else's home, smiling that wrong smile. Rebecca published nothing. She told her editor the story was a dead end, just local legend with no substance. She requested reassignment to Urban Stories, saying she was done with remote wilderness investigation. But 3 months later, Rebecca received a package at her home in Seattle. No return address. Inside was a photograph, a town photo from the 1980s, showing the residents of Frost Hollow standing in front of their houses. 200 people all smiling at the camera, and there in the back row, her face barely visible but unmistakable, was Rebecca Zhang. She'd never been to Alaska before 2020. She'd never been to Frost Hollow before that December day. But there she was in the photograph, standing with the other residents, wearing 1980s clothes, her face just starting to blur like all the others. Rebecca burned the photograph, but 2 weeks later another one arrived. Same town photo, but now she was in the front row. Then another arrived, and another. Each time, her image in the photo was clearer, more prominent. In the most recent one, she was standing in the very center, and her face was completely in focus while everyone else's had blurred to barely there smudges. Rebecca doesn't sleep much anymore. She's tried moving twice, but the photographs find her anyway. She's tried police, tried therapists, tried everything. Rational. Nothing helps, because she understands now what the man had meant. Frost Hollow doesn't let people leave. It just sometimes lets them think they've left for a while before it slowly pulls them back. The town had found her, had marked her, had started the process of making her into one of them. And every night when she closes her eyes, Rebecca finds herself standing on a street in Frost Hollow, watching herself through a window, sitting at a dinner table with a blurred family, eating pot roast and smiling that terrible wrong smile. The town is patient. It's been patient since 1987, since whenever it really started existing in that impossible twilight space between real and unreal. It can wait a little longer, but eventually Rebecca knows she'll open her eyes one morning and find herself not in her Seattle apartment, but in a house in Frost Hollow. She'll sit down at a dinner table with a family she doesn't remember. She'll smile that wrong smile, and she'll wait patiently for the next person to find the town to help them understand. You can't leave Frost Hollow. No one leaves Frost Hollow. Because Frost Hollow never lets you go. Story 5. The Frozen Transmission. Jake Kowalski had been working as a radio operator at the Amundsen-Scott South Pole Station for 18 months. At 29, he was the youngest communications specialist the National Science Foundation had ever assigned to Antarctic winter over duty. The job was simple enough: maintain radio contact with supply planes, coordinate with other Antarctic stations, monitor weather communications, and most importantly, make sure the satellite links stayed operational. During the 6 months of Antarctic winter darkness, reliable communication wasn't just convenient, it was survival. It was August 11th, 2021, the dead of Antarctic winter. The temperature outside was minus 73 Celsius with wind chills that could drop it to minus 95. At the South Pole, August was as dark as space, 24 hours of absolute blackness broken only by stars and the occasional spectacular aurora australis. The 42 researchers and support staff at the station rarely went outside during winter. They lived in their pressurized, heated buildings, maintained their equipment, conducted their science, and waited for the sun to return in October. Jake was doing his routine midnight check of the radio frequencies when he picked up something odd on the shortwave band. It wasn't unusual to hear random transmissions. Radio signals could bounce around the atmosphere and travel for thousands of miles, especially in the extreme cold and clear conditions of Antarctica. But this transmission was different. It sounded like Morse code, but wrong. The rhythm was off. The gaps between signals too precise, mathematically perfect in a way that human operators never achieved. Jake adjusted his equipment, trying to clear up the signal. The transmission continued, steady and patient. He began transcribing it, his hand automatically translating the dots and dashes into letters. What he wrote made him pause. Station Amundsen respond, Station Amundsen respond, we are lost, we are cold, please respond. Jake checked his transmission log. No distress signals had been reported, no stations were listed as in trouble. He keyed his microphone. This is Amundsen-Scott Station, South Pole. Please identify yourself and your location. Over. Static. Then the Morse code started again. Exact same message, same perfect rhythm. Station Amundsen respond, Station Amundsen respond, we are lost. We are cold, please respond. Amundsen-Scott Station responding, Jake said, speaking slowly and clearly. You are coming in on a degraded signal. Please identify your station designation and current coordinates. We can relay to rescue services. Over. The Morse code stopped. For a full minute there was only the hiss of empty static. Then a voice came through, crackling, distorted, but unmistakably human. Amundsen, Scott, station, but we are Amundsen Station. We've been calling for help for so long. Jake felt ice form in his stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. Please identify yourself. What is your station designation and year of establishment? Amundsen Station, established 1967. We've been trapped in the ice, the darkness. How long has it been? Jake's hands were shaking as he pulled up historical records on his computer. There had been an Amundsen Station, a small Norwegian research outpost established in 1967 about 200 miles from the South Pole. But it had been abandoned in 1968 after a catastrophic equipment failure during winter. The official record said the station was evacuated, all personnel recovered safely. But Jake remembered something else, rumors among Antarctic veterans about Amundsen Station. Whispers that the evacuation hadn't been complete, that something had gone wrong during the rescue, that some people might have been left behind in the confusion of the polar night. This is Amundsen Scott Station, Jake said carefully. Your historical records indicate full evacuation in 1968. Can you confirm your current status and number of personnel? 1968? The voice sounded confused, hollow. That was last month. Or was it? The darkness makes it hard to count days. There are 7 of us. The radio was damaged in the incident. We've been trying to reach anyone. Is rescue coming? Jake swallowed hard. Sir, current year is 2021. That's 53 years after your station was decommissioned. Long silence. Then, no, that's impossible. We only lost contact for a few days, maybe a week. The darkness, it makes time strange, but not 53 years. We have food for 3 months. We can't have been here for... You're wrong. You must be wrong. I'm reading from official records, Jake said, though his voice was shaking now. Amundsen Station, established 1967, decommissioned 1968, listed as fully evacuated with all personnel recovered. But we're still here. The voice was firmer now, taking on an edge of panic. I'm looking at my crewmates right now. Hansen is checking the fuel. Dimitrov is trying to repair the heater. Chen is making dinner from our rations. We're here. We're still here. Why hasn't anyone come for us? Jake felt sweat running down his back despite the air conditioning. This wasn't possible. This was a prank, had to be. Someone was playing a recording, some elaborate joke designed to spook the new Winter Over crew. But the signal was coming from the right direction. His directional equipment showed it originating from approximately 200 miles away, exactly where the old Amundsen Station would have been. Listen, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm going to report your transmission to the station commander. We'll send a team to your coordinates as soon as weather permits. Can you give me your name? Bergstrom. Lars Bergstrom. I'm the radio operator. Thank God you finally heard us. We were starting to think. The others were saying we should try to walk to the pole, but I told them we had to stay with the radio. Someone would hear eventually. Someone had to hear. Jake typed the name into his database. Lars Bergstrom, listed as radio operator at Amundsen Station, 1967-1968. Status: evacuated safely, returned to Norway, died 2003 at age 72. Mr. Bergstrom, Jake said slowly, I need you to look outside your station. What do you see? Outside? It's dark. It's always dark in winter. We're in the middle of polar night. But what do you see? Any lights? Any landmarks? A pause, then nothing. Just darkness. And ice. The ice is wrong, though. It's grown up the sides of our building. We're partially buried. We've been trying to dig out, but more ice forms every night. It's like the ice is alive. Like it wants to keep us here. Jake closed his eyes. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Mr. Bergstrom, I need you to tell me the truth. Do you remember anything unusual? Anything strange that happened before you lost contact? Long silence. Then quietly, we found something. In the ice. We were drilling core samples and we hit something else. Not ice, not rock. Something that felt warm. That shouldn't be possible at these temperatures, but it was warm. When we pulled up the drill, there was residue on it. Black residue that moved like it was alive. Some of the crew touched it before we could stop them. What happened to them? They started seeing things, hearing things. Hansen said he could hear voices in the ice calling to him. Chen kept saying there were other buildings outside, a whole city buried under the ice. Dimitrov claimed he saw his reflection walking around the station, copying his movements, but always a second behind. We thought it was just cold-induced psychosis. We sealed the residue in a container. But then the radio died, the heater started failing, and the darkness. What about the darkness? It got deeper, thicker, like it wasn't just absence of light, but a presence of dark and time. Time started acting strange. We'd think an hour had passed, but the clocks would show 6 hours. Or we'd work all day and the clocks would show only minutes. The darkness made time meaningless. And then we started losing people. Losing them? Where did they go? Outside, into the darkness. They'd say they saw lights or heard rescue planes, or that they could see the path to the pole and it was actually just a short walk. We'd try to stop them, but they'd wait until we were sleeping and then they'd just leave. We found one of them later, Hansen, frozen solid about 50 yards from the station. He was smiling, like he'd found something wonderful in the darkness. "How many of you are left?" Jake whispered. "7 of us. Or, wait." The voice paused. "No, 6. Dimitrov left yesterday. Or was it yesterday? It's hard to remember. The darkness makes everything run together. Sometimes I look at the others and I'm not sure if they're really there or if they're just echoes, shadows. Sometimes they move wrong, like Chen earlier. I saw him in 2 places at once. How is that possible? Mr. Bergstrom, I need you to listen carefully. Don't leave the station. Don't touch anything unusual. Don't go into the darkness. Do you understand?" "But the lights," Bergstrom said, and his voice had changed, become dreamy and distant. "I can see lights now. Beautiful lights dancing in the darkness. They're calling to me. They're saying there's warmth out there and people and the sun. How can the sun be out? It's winter. But I can see it just beyond the ice, just a short walk. The lights know the way." "No!" Jake shouted. "Don't follow the lights. Stay inside, Mr. Bergstrom." Static. Then faintly. "So cold, so tired. The lights are warm. Just need to walk toward the warmth." The transmission cut off. Jake sat in his radio room, hands shaking, staring at his equipment. He checked the transmission logs, verified the frequency, confirmed the directional data. Everything indicated a real transmission from approximately 200 miles away. He reported it to the station commander, who listened with increasing skepticism. They reviewed the transmission recording together. The commander agreed it was strange, but suggested equipment malfunction, atmospheric anomalies, maybe even a sophisticated prank from one of the other Antarctic stations. But Jake couldn't let it go. He researched Amundsen Station obsessively. He found old reports, crew manifests, photos. And he found something else, a classified incident report from 1968, barely mentioned in any official records. 7 crew members had initially been left behind during the evacuation due to a storm. A rescue mission was sent back 3 days later. They found the station partially buried in ice. 6 bodies were recovered, frozen. 1 crew member, Lars Bergstrom, was never found. His status was eventually changed to presumed deceased. The incident report mentioned unusual psychological effects on the rescue team. 3 of the rescuers reported seeing lights in the darkness, hearing voices, experiencing severe temporal disorientation. 2 of them had tried to walk away from the rescue vehicle toward the warm place. They had to be physically restrained. The report recommended the station be permanently abandoned and buried. No further investigation was authorized. Jake tried calling Bergstrom's frequency multiple times over the following weeks. Sometimes he'd get static, sometimes nothing. But twice more he picked up transmissions, different voices claiming to be from Antarctic stations that didn't exist or that had been abandoned decades ago. All of them said the same things: trapped in darkness, losing track of time, seeing lights, feeling the ice growing around them. The station psychologist suggested Jake was experiencing the effects of winter over syndrome: isolation, darkness, psychological stress. Jake accepted the diagnosis, stopped mentioning the transmissions, acted like everything was fine. But he kept listening. And sometimes, late at night when the rest of the station was sleeping, he'd hear it. Faint Morse code in that too-perfect rhythm. "We are lost. We are cold, please respond." The transmission was getting stronger. Whatever was out there in the darkness, buried under decades of ice, it was still calling. Still reaching out. Still trying to pull someone else into its frozen eternity. Jake's winter over contract ended in October when the sun finally returned. He was evacuated on the first available flight and never returned to Antarctica. He took a job at a weather station in Hawaii, as far from ice and snow as he could get. But on particularly cold nights, rare in Hawaii, but they do happen, Jake sometimes hears that perfect Morse code rhythm in the static of his radio. And he knows that somewhere, in the deepest darkness of the Antarctic winter, those transmissions are still going out. Still calling. Still waiting. Still offering to show the way to the warm place in the darkness, where the lights dance and time loses all meaning. Where people who died decades ago are still trapped in their final moments, still trying to reach help that will never come. Jake doesn't answer anymore. He knows better than to respond to voices from the ice. But sometimes, when he's very tired and the darkness is deep, he feels the pull. The call to walk into the cold. To follow the lights. To find out what's really waiting in that frozen darkness. And he knows with terrible certainty that one day the pull will be too strong to resist. One day he'll answer. And when he does, he'll discover what Lars Bergstrom learned 53 years ago. In Antarctica's winter darkness, time doesn't just stop. It loops, it traps, it preserves. And once the ice claims you, it never lets you go.